So that's our presentation for today. We went a little quicker than yesterday, so hopefully we have more time for questions. Kelly, I'm going to kind of turn it over to you.
Sure. Yes, we have some great questions today. So I'm going to go ahead and start at the beginning. We have a question from Teresa, and she would like to know, and this is going back to dispensing, does the pump always dispense the same amount?
So on the injector units, they are set at a percentage, and yes, they do. And one of the variables on an injector system, or that does not happen on an injector system, excuse me, is that it'll inject the exact same amount no matter what the water pressure is. The Venturi units are a little different design, and if the water pressure or the water flow, excuse me, gets too low, they can lose some accuracy. But for most times, if you have a standard water hookup and you're running it at any type of flow rate above 2.5 gallons a minute, which is pretty low, it will dispense accurately.
Okay, great. We had a question from Jolene, and she wanted to know back to the daffodils. Again, should they just be put in straight water, no flower food? Just confirming.
Yes. Gary, you want to expound on that or not?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's no problem putting daffodils in flower food. Floralife also markets a bulb food that you can use, which will help keep the leaves greener. The important thing with daffodils is to remember that they do exude a sap that could be harmful to other flowers. So you can store them in water or you can store them in flower food, but it's important to make sure they're the only flowers in the bucket that you're storing with.
Okay, great. Teresa would like to know, for the hydrangea test that we did, were the stems cut for each method?
Yeah, so when we took everything out to stress them, we cut all the stems. And whenever we did the quick dip or the hot water treatment, we gave them another short recut before we stuck them in those treatments and then put them into vases. And before everything went into vases, they were recut because we wanted to take that variable out of it. So before they went into vases of flower food or water, they were given a recut the next day.
Great. Okay, good. We had a question. Would you spray finishing touch on flowers in prep buckets?
In what type of buckets?
Prep.
Like a holding bucket.
Yep.
I would wait until you made the final arrangement, unless you think that doing it that way will make your job much more efficient. I think once the flowers are in an arrangement, it might be easier to get better coverage with the spray. And that's just my opinion. I'm not a designer, so it may be more efficient for some to treat them in those buckets. It certainly won't hurt to do that. You just want to make sure that you're getting good coverage on the flowers and the leaves.
We also had a question. Would you recommend using finishing touch with Crowning Glory? Can you use both?
Yeah, you could. So if you do have an arrangement or say a bouquet for an event and the bride's going to be holding that and it won't have any water, you can go ahead and first apply the finishing touch, let it dry, and then once it dries, put the Crowning Glory on there and then use that for the event. That's the order that I would do it. It's important to let things dry first before you reapply the other.
Right. We had our design director, one of our design directors from our team, say, just to remind people that not to really saturate it and let it drip off the stems.
Yeah, it's a great
Just wanted to remind everyone of that.
Because, spraying, the amount of spray is kind of relative for everyone. And you really just want to mist it so you can see that there's some moisture on the foliage. You don't need to keep spraying it till it's dripping off. The same thing with the Crowning Glory. So just get it on there, get good even coverage and let it dry.
Great, perfect. And then also too, we had a question, I do wedding flowers only. Which floral food do you recommend if I could only choose one?
Bruce, you want to take that one?
Well, yeah, I would recommend the 300 solution. I would go with a full strength base solution. Kind of going back to what I said earlier, the nice thing about the 300 solution is that if you have to use one solution, no matter what's your business model, it's really the best way to go. There's really no downside to using that. I guess if there is a downside, it's just a little bit more expensive. But if you remember the last few slides I did, it's so negligible in the total picture of running your operation, and you get the best results from it.
Yeah, I think a 200 solution is really more of a wholesale solution. Wholesalers are going to be storing flowers, 5 to 7 days or longer in liquid, and they don't want the flowers blowing open during that time. But as a florist, unless you're a very large florist operation and you're bringing in a lot of flowers, maybe straight from the grower, and you're going to be storing them a long time, that is the only time that I think you would need to use a holding solution. Because anything that goes out to the customer, you want to give it the maximum sugar so those flowers can develop to their potential and show the color and the proper opening.
Great. Okay, great. We do have a lot of people asking whether or not they can see this live again or see this, and yes, it will definitely be on our website tomorrow. So we will go ahead and send an email out with that information. So I do want to let you know about that. We do have some more questions here.
While you're looking, Kelly, Gary and I, Kelly, were talking yesterday after the talk, and we don't have this figured out yet, I guess is the best way to put it, but we're looking at ways to maybe offer this type of Q&A for people moving forward. If you just, for your specific business model, for your shop, if you have questions that maybe were available, maybe in a format like this to kind of help you guys with each of your individual situations. But
Right.
That's yet to be determined. So go ahead.
Right. We do have a foam question for a question we were asked was, can you freeze wet foam and unfreeze it and still have it work correct? That's interesting.
Yeah, that's a question. That's something I haven't tested. So the foam does have a cell structure. So there are, if you were to look at a microscopic shot of the foam, you would see these actual cells in there. Freezing might disrupt that and might affect the drainage. It should still saturate fine. So I guess my answer is I don't really know. I would go ahead and test it first.
Right. We did have the question, can you reuse floral foam?
Yeah, you could reuse it. So there are chemistries that are added to the foam to get it to saturate quickly. Once you use it the first time, some of those chemistries may leach out of the foam. So when you go to use it, it may be slower to saturate, but it should resaturate and it could be reused.
Okay, great, thanks. Also back to, we have a question on a dosatron. I have a dosatron that I use for my holding solution. I've noticed that the filter has to be cleaned at least 3 times a year as it seems to get gunked up and slimy. Is that normal?
Well, it doesn't sound like it, but so yeah, I can't speak to your water quality or what's going on. I don't know if it's coming from a well, and I'm not sure if it's getting dumped up, what the material, I don't know what specifically is getting dumped up. So kind of, I wouldn't know. I can tell you that if you want to have your water tested, that'd be probably the best place to start. It doesn't sound, reread that question again, Kelly. Did she say gunked up?
Yep, it's, she has to clean it every 3 times a year.
Well, and the filters will catch.
The filters, yeah.
If you have a filter on your system, most city water does not need a filter. We quit putting filters in. It was one more point of failure when we send out systems. But when you're not on a city water systems, there are times when you probably will need a filter. Gary, you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree. You know, having the water tested would make sense. To see if you're getting a lot of particulates in there. You know, any type of injection system is going to have to be cleaned periodically, and I think if you have to do it quarterly, it's not really out of the ordinary to do that. You are injecting flower food through there and sugar, and depending on how often it's being used, if it's not constantly being used, you know, that sugar could possibly crystallize in there, and you can have bacteria feeding on the sugar.
But the filter should be before the unit, so I think it may be.
Definitely.
Yeah. The other thing I was going to kind of jump on Gary's thing on foam a little bit. If you're reusing foam, understand if you've already designed it, you're going to have holes poked in it and some things of that nature. So I don't know that for the investment, reusing foam would be the best bet. It may work from a chemistry standpoint, but I'm not sure it would work from a design standpoint.
Okay, back to flower food. Do metal containers like galvanized buckets affect flower food?
Yep. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, so, you know, the flower food contains citric acid, and not that the quality of the flower food is going to be affected, but it can certainly corrode metal. And even though it's galvanized and protected, I think at some point, if you keep reusing that and adding, you know, an acidic flower food that has a pH of around, you know, 3 to 5, you could see some problems with the metal starting to corrode.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. We did have another foam question. Should we store soaked Oasis foam in a cooler? Would that help?
Yeah, there's certainly no problem storing it in the cooler and letting it chill down. We've never done any actual testing to see if putting flowers into chilled foam would help with flower life, but we do recommend using chilled water when you process flowers. So using chilled foam should have the same benefits.
Great. Yes, still great questions we have coming. How should flowering branches be processed?
Yeah, branches, that's something personally I don't have a lot of experience with. You know, the physiology of the woody stem is a little different than a lot of these herbaceous cut flowers that we work with. I would think that uptake is probably a little more challenging with woody stems. So I would recommend trying a quick dip treatment. When you get those, you know, give them a fresh cut, do the quick dip, and then go into your flower food solution.
I'll jump on that a little bit just from my own experience here. And Gary has not tested this, but I have a lot of lilacs in my yard. And so I've found that the express flower food with a cut with lilacs is very effective. And
Yeah, that's a good point.
there's no data to support that. That's just Bruce running out in his backyard and cutting some lilacs. But you can try that too. That might be an option for woodier stems.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and we're always thinking about express as the no-cut treatment, but it works really well with a cut and gives you that advantage of better hydration. So for a lot of those, you know, woody stems that you might work with in the spring, I think that would be a good treatment to use. So I'd even do quick dip and then go into the express solution.
Question that we had from Alexander, the Procana bucket of 200 solution with 2 pumps per gallon, would the ratio be sufficient for the flowers when pouring from the Procana bucket into the vase? Procona, I should say, sorry about that, or would we need to add more solution? Again, the Procona bucket of 200 solution with 2 pumps per gallon. Would the ratio be sufficient for the flowers when pouring from the Procona bucket into the vase? Or would we need to add more solution?
Okay, so I think I understand that. I wouldn't know the scenario in which you would take a Procona bucket and that process the flowers and use the same flower food for the base. I think that's the assumption I'm going to make here.
Right.
And I guess the short answer is, once you establish what your mixed ratio, which is established correctly, you would not add more flower food to that point, because you'll take it out of balance if you've mixed it correctly. Gary, does that sound correct to you?
Yeah, I mean, once it's mixed, it's mixed. So, you know, the 200 solution, it's 10 mils per liter. If you have a gallon, it's approximately 4 liters. So, you know, you're adding 40 mils per gallon in your Procona, and once it's mixed, it's mixed. It's not that you're going to have significant evaporation, and if anything, as water evaporates, the flower food would get more concentrated. I can't think of a scenario where you'd actually have to add more to it if you're just pouring that solution directly into a vase.
Just know if you are doing that scenario, then you're using a 200 level solution for a room temperature vase arrangement. So
yeah, and we really recommend
that you would just mix for the vase separately with 300.
So once you mix the solution in the gallon jug for the day, what is the lifespan keeping it in the cooler?
Good question. I forgot to cover that. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talked about the DCD solution yesterday. You know, all this becomes kind of subjective. But I tell people a week. I think if it's in the cooler and if it's in a clean container and it's mixed and it's in a cooler, I can't imagine anybody storing it for longer than a week. But that would be my recommendation. And how much scientific data is based behind that recommendation, you could argue, but I would say if you put the variables of a clean container in a cold cooler at night when you store it, I think you could do that easily.
Good. Barbara mentioned that she uses short pipe cleaners or toothpicks in daffodils and lets the stem touch the wet foam.
Okay, so she's using the pipe cleaner to insert it into the foam?
Into the stem of the daffodil.
And then taking the stem and
putting it in. Mm-hmm.
With the pipe cleaner. So the pipe cleaner's basically helping to lick the solution up. That's my assumption. Correct? So is she asking if that's a good idea? Or?
I think she's just mentioning that's what she does for her,
okay.
What she uses, how she works with that. Okay. We had just a couple questions too about the quiz, and again, that'll be on tomorrow. That'll be available tomorrow, and we'll send an email out to everybody that attended, and it'll have a link to that. So you'll see that tomorrow, and it'll also have both this presentation today and yesterday's. So if you need to refresh on any subject, you can definitely do that. I think
Ellie, I saw a lot of comments coming in on the chat that people could only see half of the screen.
I think that was one person, and then we verified that there was that everybody else was seeing the full screen. So I'm going to go ahead and reach out to that person personally,
okay.
But I think it was just the one person.
If that's the case, the good news is you can rewatch it. So.
Right. Also, too, we had a question about back to foam again. When foam turns brown, is it still okay to use?
Yeah, good question. So the chemistry of the foam is such, at least with our foam, that if it's exposed to UV light, it will start to fade and get brown. It does not affect the quality of the foam and how it will absorb water or act with the flowers. You kind of see this a lot in wholesale operations where they might have the different shapes displayed on the shelves, and they're exposed to the lights in the store, and they start to fade. So the simple answer is you don't have to be worried about that in terms of efficacy, although it doesn't have the nice green color it initially has.
Great. I had a comment from Susan. She said that she stores her wet foam in a Ziploc baggie in her refrigerator. So,
Yeah, and there's no problems with that.
right.
You know, sometimes we do see some mold growth in our testing towards the end of our tests. Usually the arrangements are probably 7 to 10 days old at that point. And in the refrigerator, I would just look out for that if you're storing it in a bag. But as long as the foam is looking clean, there's no problem to do that. And it's a great way to keep it from losing water.
Okay, thank you. Alrighty, we did have a couple questions too, Gary, on bulb flowers like glads, hyacinth, and so on, and saying that they've been told that they don't need flower food. Can you talk to us about that?
Well, it's tough to lump all the bulbs into one, and there is a bulb food that is out there, and a lot of the things we see with bulbs in vase life tend to affect leaf yellowing. So while the flowers may look great, you can see yellowing of the leaves, which can be unsightly. So I haven't had a lot of experience with hyacinths per se, but I know that gladiolus respond well to flower food. So I would not say that bulb flowers don't need a flower food. You know, things like iris, for example, they're a flower that will get yellowing of the leaves, and the flowers themselves are short-lived. Even with flower food, they may last 3 to 4 days. Things like lilies will benefit from flower food in terms of opening, and so I'm kind of rambling on here, but I would say that's not true.
Well, my position on it is more from an operational standpoint, which is, and Gary, you can jump in, there really isn't any negative effects from flower food. You may put flower food in with a crop and it may not help.
Yeah.
It doesn't just take down any flower life. So if you're going to get into the position of micromanaging which buckets have water and which buckets have flower food for a quarter, I think that's kind of a bad way to spend your time. And you might want to just use flower food with everything. And then you eliminate having to know whether this crop or that crop has water, or you can use this bucket or mix flowers or whatever, because there's no detriment that I know of on bulb crops, but I think there's some limited benefit. Would you agree, Gary, with some crops?
And if anything, the flower food is going to help control bacteria, and it's going to keep those stems free flowing. So there really is no harm of using it with bulb crops.
Okay, just another couple, and we're reaching the 2 o'clock hour here, East Coast time. We just had one comment. Did you say not to add fresh flower to an arrangement for a week? Question mark.
Flower food to, no. What I said was that I'm sorry if I wasn't clear there, that if you send an arrangement out with properly mixed flower food in it, that flower food should be good in the arrangement for around a week. Once again, there's a lot of variables. Temperature, you know, if the consumer is putting it on top of their TV and it's 90 degrees over the arrangement, it's going to draw the solution a lot faster. It may drink the base dry, who knows. But I guess my overall point in that, without putting time limits on days and things of that nature, is to make sure your consumer knows that flower food is in there. It's pretty much good. I mean, it's good till it's down to nothing for the most part. And you want to make sure you add flower food to the arrangement so that you don't dilute what's in there. And I guess too often I see in a consumer's home, they get an arrangement and 36 hours into having it, the solution goes down a half an inch and they pour water in there. And then at that point, bacteria is going to start growing because now the flower food that you've sent out perfectly is now out of balance. So it's kind of a tightrope to walk with the consumer. And it's one of those things I really preach in the real versus the ideal that's difficult to do. Hopefully that makes things a little clearer.
And I think you could always use just the eye test, and a base solution, if it's working properly, it should be clear. And if it starts getting very cloudy, it means the bacterial load is getting high. Some flowers and a vase, if it's not clean, you might have a higher bacterial load. We talked about dahlias yesterday briefly. That's a flower that seems to harbor a lot of bacteria. So if the vase solution is starting to look cloudy and it doesn't look good, just change it, switch it out with some fresh flower food. And that's really the best way to go.
Yeah, and probably I made the point wrong, but my point is that don't let your consumer necessarily mess around with the arrangement initially and add. I don't think it's necessary if things are sent out correctly.
Great, great. And then just a couple other comments and questions here. We had a question regarding finishing touch and crowning glory. Is this something that you can put on a cake or flowers to wear? Is it something that is safe to have in your food or safe to wear?
Yeah, it's not labeled for application to any type of food. So no, I would not recommend doing that. We would probably have to get testing done and to get it labeled for that use. So the answer is no, just use it on arrangements. It shouldn't be going on anything that's going into somebody's mouth.
Okay, so not on a cake or anything like that.
Exactly.
Okay, good, great, good. I think we've got a lot of the questions answered. So some awesome questions. Consumer solution.
One here about express with an arrangement. I was looking.
Right.
Let's see. Using Express 300 shop and sending packets home with the customer, is it correct that they won't need to recut the arrangement if it's 7 days or more? Gary, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, exactly. It's designed to be easier to use for the customer. So if you're sending them home with a fresh arrangement, once they get it home, they can mix up the flower food. There should be no need for them to go ahead and recut that bouquet or that arrangement.
And, it's consumers tend not to recut. The ones that do are a little more educated, but that is a nice insurance policy in the Express.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't have to cut the stems, and most consumers don't take the time to do it or don't know if they should or things of that nature.
Great. Well, great. Well, we've run a little bit over today, and I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Again, thank you to Gary and to Bruce for putting this presentation together and this class together for us. We will again have everything available on our website. So keep an eye out for an email that'll go out with all of the information, the landing page that'll take you to yesterday's presentation and today's presentation. And again, this is where you'll find the links to the quiz and to where you'll end up going for your certificate. So again, we can't thank you enough for joining us for this first installment of Oasis University, the care and handling of fresh flowers.
And Kelly, can I just make one comment?
Absolutely.
This presentation was kind of a helicopter view of a lot of topics. And when you look at that pyramid at the beginning with the different sections, we can really go in depth in a lot of those. So if the people who watch this today have any desire to go deeper into some of these topics, let us know. And we could do future presentations where we really dive into things.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you again, everybody, for attending. And thanks to, again, to Bruce and Gary. We really appreciate it.
It was fun. Thanks.
See you later.
All righty. Bye-bye.